My name is David Koropkin. I'm a third-year student at Brooklyn Law School for a couple more weeks, and I'm president of SALDF. And I also run Goose Watch NYC, which is a really important wildlife advocacy organization in New York City. And it is my privilege to introduce our very esteemed panelists today who are going to talk about advancements in animal protection and factory farming. First, we'll hear from Suzanne McMillan. Suzanne is content director for the ASPCA's Farm Animal Welfare Campaign. Prior to the ASPCA, Suzanne researched and investigated factory farms, worked with rescued farm animals, and served as the Farm Animal Law Fellow for Lewis and Clark Animal Law Clinic. And Suzanne is a PACE Law alum and has an LLM in agricultural and food law from the University of Arkansas. And Stacey Evans is an ALDF board member and the CEO and founder of Humane Strategies Benefit LLC, which we'll hear about, a business empowering nonprofits, scientists, and veterinarians to advocate effectively for laws and policies that promote animal health, the human-canine bond, and sound wildlife management. And Stacey is a member of the USDA Secretary's Advisory Committee on Animal Health. She's the first member of the committee to exclusively represent animal welfare interests. Very nice. And David A. Wolfson, Professor Wolfson, is a partner at Milbank and an adjunct professor at NYU and NYU School of Law. He has written extensively in the area of animal protection and has also taught at Harvard Law School and Columbia Law School, and he currently represents Compassion Over Killing, Mercy for Animals, Compassion in World Farming, and HSUS, among other animal protection groups. And with that, I will turn over to our first speaker. I think after hearing all morning about the problems in factory farming, maybe we're ready to hear about some progress. Hopefully. I don't know. Maybe not.
We should be eating a lot of broiler chickens. Do my best. Hey everyone. So like David said, I graduated from PACE in '09, so I'm really excited to be back. It's also a bit nerve-wracking because this is like the room where I took CivPro and the room where I did all kinds of scary tests and people were yelling at me. Scary professors, so it's like a weird thing being back at PACE, but I'm so honored because I actually started the SALDF chapter for PACE back in 2006, so it means a lot to me, and I was president for a couple of years while I was here, and so it's just really awesome to come back and come full circle. And I've been at the ASPCA since 2011, which is the year that we began our farm animal welfare program, and I think even now, it's been going on 4 years, and I'd say most people are not aware that we even have a farm animal welfare program. We're traditionally known for dog and cat work, and we've been at that work since the 1800s, and so I think that right there says a lot about kind of the state of farm animal protection in the U.S. that even a very large, historic group like the ASPCA has now entered this field, and our work focuses primarily on the CAFO system, so factory farming, essentially trying to dismantle that system. And so back in 2011, when I was charged with figuring out what we're going to focus on, I realized pretty quickly that broiler chickens, for a number of reasons, seemed like a really great constituency to take on for protection for a number of reasons. So I'm going to be discussing that first, and then I'll hit on our organic work. So if I'm talking a bit quickly, it's because I went back and forth on which topic to highlight, and I realized they were both so important I couldn't pass one up, so I'll try to cover a lot of ground. So broilers, we decided to take on broilers as our lead focus, partly because far and away they're the most numerous animal of all of the types of animals we're raising in the U.S. for food today. So I think, the current number is something like 9.2 billion animals, land animals, every year are raised for food, and of those, nearly all are actually broiler chickens. I think the latest statistics around 8.6 billion. And just to be clear, broiler chickens are the type of chicken who we raise for meat, as opposed to for eggs, which means that they're a completely different breed of chicken. They look very different, they act fairly differently, they have a lot of different needs, and the industry treats them very differently. They're in an entirely different type of system, which we'll see photos in a few minutes. But one of the things I realized was that most people aren't aware of, I don't think that the consumer public really understands the distinction that there even is a different type of chicken being used in each industry, and that the industries each have their own things going on. So that was one reason to take this on. You know, the suffering of broiler chickens tends to go unheard and unseen. It's not like egg-laying hens where this idea, the notion of a battery cage is like, you know, for the most part, I think people have some idea at this point that there's something going on with severe confinement of caged hens. But when it comes to broiler chickens, nobody really has any conception of what their life looks like. And they are, for the most part, factory farmed, very intensively raised in all the ways you would imagine, you know, a farmed animal would be raised in the US. And again, we'll see pictures in a minute. One of their biggest problems, though, that I want to highlight is they're not just, if you will, caged or imprisoned in their physical surroundings, but they really are sort of imprisoned in their own bodies, because we're selectively breeding these birds in very intentional ways for specific outcomes. And those really focus on three things that cause a lot of problems for birds. One is the rate of growth. So I'll show you a chart in a minute that shows how drastically that's changed over the last few decades. The second is the weight that they reach, so the slaughter weight, if you will. These birds, while they're still chicks, reach the weight of an adult bird. So that you can imagine the problems that's creating for them. And then the third is their body conformation. So the American consumer really likes white breast meat, and because of that, we've actually changed the shape of the birds to accommodate that desire. And so most of the weight and the meat is focused up high and in the front, and that creates a lot of problems as well. And as a result of this largely going unknown, I think there has not been a lot of pressure put on policymakers to try to institute even some meager protections for these birds. So we don't see the types of campaigns that we've seen, for example, for veal calves or gestating sows who are locked in these, you know, horrible crates, the gestation crates, to at least give them, you know, get them out and give them a little bit more space. We haven't seen that yet for broiler chickens, and part of that is because I think they're not caged, and so it's harder to understand what they need. What is it that would help at least improve the situation for them? And so they're largely left out of even the few laws we do have that address some of the problems of intensive confinement for certain types of farmed animals in certain conditions in certain states. So you can see here on this chart, the consumption of chickens in the US is continuing to rise. It's been for some time now. So again, going back to the point that the majority of animals we're eating in the US are chickens. And worldwide, we see a similar trajectory in terms of numbers of animals. You can see chickens are the top bar, and just far and away they overshadow all the other main species humans are raising and consuming. And again, a worldwide view here. And so, like I mentioned, one of the problems we've seen is this inversion with the amount of time it takes to raise these broiler chickens to a slaughter weight versus the weight that they ultimately achieve. And so it used to be that back in the 1920s, it would take 112 days to get a bird up to slaughter weight, but the weight that they reached was just a couple pounds. Now it takes 6 weeks or less, and they reach more than double that weight. And the industry is well aware of this fact, and it tends to be quite proud. It tends to actually tout these statistics, like, look what a great job we've done of fattening up these birds and lowering the amount of time it takes to get them to slaughter. You know, this is great for efficiency. There is the other side, though, where they really struggle with the welfare outcomes that are correlated with this fast growth and the huge weights. And so we do sometimes see these sorts of industry analyses, like what came out of USDA here in this article, why are chickens getting too fat? These birds actually reach obesity within a few weeks. If you do not slaughter them, they will become clinically obese, and they will begin to have heart attacks. They have trouble breathing. All the sorts of things that you actually see in humans. Here's a great quote that came from a scientific journal looking at the problems among broiler flocks. If humans grew at a similar rate, a newborn baby would reach 660 pounds after 2 months. That's the rate of growth we're seeing in these birds. It is absolutely astronomical. It is totally unnatural. There was another scientific journal article I found that referred to them as extreme organisms. And here we see what I was discussing, that part of what we've done to them through this selective breeding is change their actual body shape such that we're really trying to get as much meat off the breast area as we can. And so you can see on this chart a rise in the percentage of breast meat that's coming off these birds, and some of what that does is it literally crowds their heart. If you think about it, the heart's in the same region of the body as the breast muscle, and so proportionately they don't have as much heart capacity and also their lung capacity is lowered, and so it creates problems for them just with locomotion, breathing, just very, very basic functions that you would expect an animal could engage in. And so this is the type of behavior we see as a result. Within sometimes a few days, certainly a few weeks, we start seeing these birds, they tend to go lame. So their legs will give out from under them. They'll have a lot of tendon problems, a lot of pain with walking and standing, even for a few minutes. And so you frequently see them, industry studies have found that they'll spend 80 to 90% of their time often laying down. So that is not normal behavior for a chicken, right? So I think most of us, we probably haven't spent a lot of time around chickens, but you have some conception of, out in the yard scratching, that type of thing. You don't tend to see that type of activity from broiler chickens. Broiler chickens, especially as they age, it becomes more and more laborious for them to really do anything, and so they'll tend to try to limit their need to move down to really just eating and drinking. Besides that, they'll try to just sit and conserve energy, and you'll frequently see them panting. We see kind of a distended abdomen here going on, often what you see, because in a broiler system, and I'll show you more photos in a minute that make it clearer, they're not caged. Instead, they all live together in essentially a warehouse, and they're living directly on their own waste. And because they spend most of their time laying, their skin is rubbing in waste, which is thick with ammonia. So it's actually the same sort of outcome that you would expect from a person if somebody's bedridden, right, and going to the bathroom on themselves. What happens? They develop bed sores. Right, their skin starts to wear away. The same thing happens for these chickens, and so you start seeing areas where the feathers aren't there anymore, and then the skin becomes rubbed raw, and then what happens is often we find actual open wounds opening up on them, so they develop sores and blisters. Very painful, and that actually makes them even less inclined to want to move, so it becomes kind of a cycle for them. So these are just some photos of their bodies, which look very, very different from the older, more traditional breeds of chicken. And this is a shot of a typical house. They tend to be fully sealed in, so no windows, no fresh air or sunlight coming in. The flock sizes continue to increase. The average now is about 40,000 birds in each warehouse, and sometimes more than that. And as they grow, they fill in that size, and it gets to the point where each one has less than 1 square foot on average of floor space on which to live. So that's kind of a typical scene, just kind of a sea of bodies, mostly laying down. The only ones standing up, you'll notice, are pretty much the ones who are eating or drinking, and then they'll go and lay back down. There's really nothing for them to do in these sheds. They're barren. There's no sort of outlet for physical or mental, health. So why are we at this point? I mean, why do we have a system like this? It's clearly completely unethical. There are even minimal improvements that could be made pretty easily and quickly for these birds. And so why are we in a position where this is going on? As I mentioned, part of it is that there just hasn't traditionally been a focus on this system in the US, and that is now changing. So I think that will help. But part of it is understanding the legal structure that tends to be in place when you're dealing with a broiler system. So there are pretty much 2 big players in the broiler industry, which I should mention is probably the most monolithic industry of all the farm animal industries in the US. So in other words, it tends to pretty much look the same across the board no matter who you're dealing with, which company. They all raise their birds the same way. They all use the same type of bird. They're pretty much interchangeable with each other. There's very little variation. So for the most part, what you have is a vertically integrated system. And this chart is actually off of the National Chicken Council's website. It's very proud of this system. And the 2 main players are the integrator, if you will, which is like Tyson or Purdue or Pilgrim's Pride. And then you have what's called the grower or the producer, and that is usually the person or the farm that actually is hands-on with the birds on their property and is doing the raising of the birds for the 6 weeks on average that it takes those birds to go from a chick to, well, still a chick, but old enough and heavy enough to be slaughtered. So in this production cycle, the integrator, which again is like a Purdue, owns pretty much all of the points of production along that cycle, all the way from producing the feed that's going to feed the chicks, to sourcing the birds, to transportation, to slaughter, to processing. They control most of those points along the chain, not exclusively, but most. The one big area of exception is the actual grow out time, the 6 weeks it takes to raise the bird. And at that point, the control is in the producer's hands, one would think. That's how it's represented by the industry to the public, is that the producer is in control of these animals, essentially as an independent contractor. The reality is that there are what are called production contracts, which are contracts drawn up between the two parties. And they tend to be flock-to-flock contracts, meaning that they last just 6 weeks or so. And there are detailed stipulations regarding drafted by the integrating company directing how the producer is to raise those birds, and it's everything down to the temperature that needs to be maintained, the amount of feed, the type of feed that needs to be delivered, whether there will be subtherapeutic antibiotics in that feed. Pretty much everything is covered in there, and so the actual producer has very little control. So in other words, there's not a lot of ability there to make welfare improvements. So appealing to an individual farmer regarding the welfare of their flock probably won't get you very far. They don't have much latitude there legally. So the focus really needs to go back to the integrator who's setting those terms and has a lot of power in that, in the contract negotiation, to focus on the specific terms that are going to ultimately impact the animals. So the question then might arise, okay, well, if you're not going to get very far with the people directly raising the birds, and it's going to be hard to get very far with the integrator because they have a lot invested in keeping the system as it is, well, isn't there somebody who can come in and enforce the law? I mean, I have this question all the time, like, well, bring in the agency that's in charge of farm animal welfare, like where are they on the farm? Well, the answer is there is no agency in charge of animal welfare on farm. So federally, we have no laws regarding on-farm welfare. And on the state level, there are some states where there are a few cruelty codes still left that don't exempt some or all types of animals or situations in which you're raising an animal for food, and so it could be argued that broiler chickens may sometimes fall under some of those, but we don't tend to see enforcement. And there have been some laws passed regarding specific confinement practices, the really extreme confinement, like again, the gestation crates and the battery cages, but broilers have not yet been addressed in any of those anti-confinement laws, so it remains to be seen whether that may be something that could have some effect. And then we have the regulatory sphere, which is a really dynamic one right now. There are certain terms that are, USDA's FSIS agency does regulate certain terms, labels that you find on food, and some of those do potentially inform, the consumer's understanding of how a broiler chicken was raised. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding because most of these terms end up being hollow, if you will. So for example, you'll often see a cage-free claim on a chicken package, but the reality is that broiler chickens are raised in cages. So that means nothing. Essentially, the same thing with a process verified claim generally, and then the natural claim essentially is moved because that has no animal welfare tie-in. It means something like no synthetic additives or otherwise minimally processed. Something like that has nothing to do with the way the bird was actually raised on farm. It has to do with the processing after slaughter. So we're left with very little in that sphere except for organic, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you have private labels and certifications where potentially there's an opportunity there, around a misleading claim, but very little to work with. And so avenues for reform, of course I wanted to cast a positive light on this and focus on where can we go from here, and I do think there's quite a bit of fodder, and we're in the very infancy stages of all of this, but just some ideas of where we may see ourselves going in the future would be sort of 4 big areas of work: legislative, regulatory, the enforcement end, and then the marketplace. So as I mentioned, there are currently no federal laws for on-farm treatment of animals. If we could see one go through, then hopefully it would include broiler chickens, so that would of course be kind of a starting point. I also mentioned that state cruelty codes, the few that are left that don't entirely exclude broiler chickens, if we saw better enforcement, that would be an option. Creating some sort of on-farm authority through some type of federal agency to start going into farms and enforcing welfare. broiler-specific laws. In the EU, we actually have seen there is a law that deals specifically with broiler chickens, and it lays down the technical details. They need this much space, they deserve this many hours of, natural light or whatever it is. So that would be an option in the US theoretically. Further clarifying the role of that grower versus the integrator. We've seen a lot of case law in this area. This is a big dispute. Are the growers employees or are they independent contractors? Who has the power? Who has the knowledge? Knowledge becomes a big question in these cases as well. Is the integrator aware of what's going on a particular farm? If there is an argument that possibly a law was violated, well, did the integrator know that a law was being violated? These are areas that can be clarified. Refining and better enforcing existing labels. Again, going back to labels like natural and organic, if we could actually get meaningful animal welfare implications added in, that could do something for broiler chickens. Finally, outside of the legal sphere, we have the marketplace. And that really breaks down into two main areas. It's appealing to consumers by educating them about the reality and encouraging them to look for better options. It's also about appealing directly to the industry. So working with retailers and working with these integrating companies, appealing to them to institute changes. We have a campaign we're running called The Truth About Chicken, and you can find it at truthaboutchicken.org and learn a lot more about this. And so that's one of our big pushes, is to educate the consumer public. So just real quickly, some related issues, areas where you can get traction on broiler issues without having to deal directly with broiler welfare. We've been very active in all these areas at the ASPCA. One is antibiotics, the use of drugs on farm. That is a huge concern right now on the part of the consumer public and industry. We're seeing lots of big announcements coming out from companies that they're removing drugs from these birds. So that is a really wide open field to step in and say, wait a minute, if you're gonna take drugs away, you need to address the underlying circumstances that have you administering drugs routinely to begin with. They're not giving drugs for no reason. They're giving them because they compensate for stressful, unsanitary, unhealthy conditions that birds are forced to live in. So if they're gonna remove the drugs, it makes sense to actually make some improvements on farm. The line speed rule, you may have heard about this. USDA, I guess last year, put out a proposed rule to increase the speed at which you can run slaughter lines for chickens and turkeys. It's already so fast, it's hard to even understand. I mean, we're talking faster than 2 birds per second with chickens, and they wanted to increase it even further. And there was a lot of controversy around this, and most of the pushback came not from animal groups, it was from worker groups who were concerned with the repetitive motion injuries that are happening to workers on the line, things like that. But we stepped in with the animal voice and said, there's also concern from an animal perspective here, and we were able to really collaborate strongly with those groups. And we were actually able to beat back that rule to a large extent. And then organics, I will. And how am I doing on time? I'm sorry, maybe running.
No, like less than 5 minutes. But.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. So I'll stop with broilers for now and just highlight real quickly for you organics, because this is a really hot topic right now. This is happening as we speak, super dynamic. The USDA is currently revisiting its animal welfare rules for the organic program. So I wanted to make sure you all know about this, because there's the opportunity for public participation in the rulemaking process. So the Organic Foods Production Act of 1990 is what created this framework that we now have. The National Organic Standards Board is an advisory committee, and so it's governed under FACA. For those of you who are into knowing what the statute is that controls things, I forget what it stands for, but anyway, they set the rules around how the advisory committee functions. It in turn informs the National Organic Program, so they provide recommendations around animal welfare and other things to the National Organic Program. The National Organic Program is part of USDA. It's actually a program run by USDA, administered by the Agricultural Marketing Service. So that's sort of the relationship here. So in the organic rules, we see a lot of, really kind of idealistic language around what animals should be afforded, year-round access outdoors and free, exercise, freedom of movement. It sounds really great, like pasture, and you're like, well, at least if they're going to be raised for food, wow, it's great that they have these things. That doesn't sound anything like factory farming. That's like amazing. And I should mention there are some 27 million animals right now being raised organically each year for food. So it's a significant number. I mean, compared to 9 billion, it's small, but you know, we're still talking a good chunk, and it's growing really expansively right now. Then you start looking at the details of the language, and there are so many loopholes built in. The two main problems we see are there are just a lot of exceptions written explicitly into the rules. So we end up with situations like you're allowed to use feedlots to fatten slaughter stock, and you're allowed to keep birds indoors actually. So where there tends to be a lot of focus on pasture, the reality is that outdoor access becomes like the focal point for a lot of arguing over, well, not really when you're in like the last few months of their life when you're fattening them. And if you're a bird, yeah, not so much. You can actually be kept indoors. So that's become a really big area of argument. The other issue we run into is just a lot of vagueness. Things are not defined, metrics are not offered, language is very broad, and so there have been a lot of calls for USDA to really tighten the language. So the result we end up seeing is really basically factory farming on a lot of farms, and I would say not the majority of farms. I'd say that the majority probably are adhering to the spirit of organics, if you will. But the problem is that it only takes a few farms, a few industrial scale farms not doing things well to start producing a large volume of animals coming out of these really bad conditions. And that's what we're now seeing is arguably the majority of animals are raised in factory farming conditions. And so I just kind of threw together a list to give you some sense of the types of conditions you'll encounter. Pretty much reads like a typical factory farm. And we have surveyed the public. We've surveyed the general public. We've also surveyed folks who specifically consume organics, and everybody is pretty much like shocked by this. People don't realize this is happening. So there's definitely a gap there in knowledge. So my suggestions would be, and this is what we're working on to some extent, tightening again. We need more definition in the rules, we need clarity, we need precision, we need metrics. So somebody needs to go back through those rules and really be more explicit in what's being required, and we've submitted comments for rulemaking to that extent. Also augmenting the rules, adding more in would really help. And then finally there is the enforcement piece. Obviously USDA needs to do its part to make sure that whatever is addressed on paper, at least that much is being enforced. And there have been a lot of allegations that even that much isn't happening for animals. So what I wanted to point out is just that as we speak, there is this process happening. Like I said, USDA is currently revising the rules for animal welfare. It's in the process of rulemaking. It has already drafted, it's already done the first draft, and that is now circulating internally at USDA. So we don't have the benefit of seeing that language. We don't know yet where they've come down on some of these issues. But that is ultimately going to be released for public comment, and it will probably be like a 60 to 90 day period during which anybody as a member of the public can offer comments. And so I really encourage all of you, we'll certainly be updating people through the ASPCA web pages. I'd encourage all of you to participate in that process. And that's it. Thank you. I hope anybody caught any of that because I was talking so fast.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna keep this one kind of brief, all right? Try to do it in under 20 minutes. It's got a train to catch at 4:30. I gotta leave here and get back to the DC area. So, hope all of you are well. I know this is late afternoon too, so I'll try to be entertaining as well. So, yeah, I am just gonna jump right into this. I am going to give you some background information about the United States Department of Agriculture Secretary's Advisory Committee on Animal Health. Then I'm going to talk about the recent activities the committee has done to improve the welfare of farm animals in the U.S. So, by way of background, you can see the green here. That represents veterinarians. There are 20 members on the advisory committee. 12 of those members are veterinarians. 2 of those vets also raise animals for food. There are 6 ranchers. There are 2 attorneys, myself, and then there's another attorney who raises animals for food. And then there are 2 executives of agricultural trade associations who serve on the committee. So how do you get to be on the committee? Well, The USDA secretary, who is an executive appointed by the US President, appoints members to serve on the committee. And members serve on a charter about 2 to 3 years. The current charter expires next month. So I was appointed, as David mentioned earlier, to exclusively represent the interest of animal welfare and animal rights organizations. So what that means is I converse with people like Animal Defense Fund, Animal Health Institute, and other animal welfare organizations. I share the issues that the committee is dealing with and give them opportunity to share their concerns. And then I bring those concerns to the committee and work towards a solution to address those concerns. All right. So the committee was established back in 1972, basically to advise the USDA on ways to promote the health of farm animals. Basically to make farm animals healthy enough for people to eat. That's the reason. And so because the committee's focus is on animal health, our focus is going to be on diseases that farm animals get. And the advice that we give the USDA secretary is in the form of written recommendations. All right, so I'm going to talk about 3 areas that the committee recently made recommendations in, actually last month. We submitted formal written recommendations to the USDA secretary to improve the welfare of farm animals. Those areas are antimicrobial resistance, and emergency preparedness, and animal disease traceability. And there are many other areas. I'm just focusing on those 3. All right, so antimicrobial resistance. You know, you've heard about this, right? The kid gets sick, he's got the flu, or he's got another bacterial infection. He goes to the hospital, gets treatment. Guess what? The treatment's not working. That's a form of antimicrobial resistance. And antibiotics are just one type of an antimicrobial. So, let's see. Antimicrobials, what's a tie-in? I believe Suzanne mentioned this earlier, like about the use of antibiotics. Basically, antimicrobials are used in the feed of farm animals to keep them healthy because they live in filthy conditions. The USDA knows this, all right, the ranchers know this, even the ranchers on the committee, you know, they kind of admit that. And so that's why they're used. They're also used to enhance the growth of the animal, so it produces more meat, as Suzanne mentioned. And they're also used when animals are actually sick. So there are many different uses. So the concern that the committee has is, you know, that the use of antimicrobials could be contributing to antimicrobial resistance. The reality is there's no complete evidence or knowledge that the use of antimicrobials on farms actually causes antimicrobial resistance. So the committee is recommending 3 things. 3 things I'm going to highlight. Number 1, the USDA determine what causes antimicrobial resistance so we can address it and treat it. The other thing the USDA is recommending is, or the committee is recommending, is that the USDA promote using antimicrobials only to treat sick animals or to keep them healthy, all right, and not, or basically to discourage using antibiotics and other antimicrobials solely to enhance the growth of an animal. The third thing that the committee recommended, and this is a big one, is that the USDA design animal husbandry and production practices that will reduce the need to even use antimicrobials on farm. And that's a big one. And how that was made is because of animal welfare stakeholders. Yeah, that's a big one.
We need to talk after this.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the reasons why that's even up there is because animal welfare stakeholders shared the concerns with me. I was able to share that with the committee, and we were able to see the importance, I was able to convince them of the importance of that issue, and we were able to come up with a solution. And this is just part of the solution. I don't know what that's going to mean, but it's a start, right? It's a start. Okay. The next area that the committee made recommendations in is an emergency preparedness. You know, this basically deals with the USDA's ability to respond to an animal disease emergency. What do I mean by that? I mean like a highly contagious, nasty disease, like foot and mouth disease. I don't know how many of you are familiar with foot and mouth disease. Okay, some people are. It's not the same that humans get the hand and mouth disease. This is a nasty disease. I mean, it causes sores, blisters all over the animal's mouth, around their hooves, and it affects basically animals, farm animals with split hoofs. So you're talking about pig, cattle, bison, sheep, goats. A lot of different farm animals can get this. And it's so easily spread, like bodily fluids. It's kind of like Ebola for farm animals. It's really, really bad and a serious illness. So you can see a picture right there. That's a picture of what it looked like. So while the U.S. it doesn't really face a lot of FMD outbreaks, it has in the past. An example, 9 times since 1870, and back in 1914 and 1960, about 172,000 cattle, sheep, and pigs were killed, basically to treat or address the FMD. Why were they killed? Unfortunately, this is a big concern of the committee, the USDA uses a stamping out method. What that means is farm animals are just slaughtered as quickly as possible. So the Humane Slaughter Act really doesn't apply because it's an emergency situation. And the humaneness of their methods, it's an afterthought. I actually asked, raised that question in the meeting, in-person meeting that the committee had last year. And they were very honest. They were like, look, we don't want to do that, but that's just, and they do that to try to contain the disease. So other animals, so it's not spread to other animals. I did read up that there are ways that for the USDA to address this other than just stamping out. There are new advances in science that can better address this. So the committee came up with some recommendations. So the stamping out method, that's a concern of the committee. The shortage of vaccines, that's a big problem. FMD is a viral disease, and it's kind of like the flu vaccine. You can get vaccinated, you ride a train, right? Somebody coughs on you with the flu, and with a strain of the flu that you are not vaccinated against, you get sick. Same thing with FMD, same thing. So to address those concerns and to ensure that the U.S. is prepared to solve and handle them, the committee recommends basically that the USDA have sufficient funds to provide enough vaccines to protect farm animals from foot and mouth disease or any other highly contagious disease, and that they fully fund the National Animal Health Laboratory Network at $25 million to effectively monitor diseases. And the National Veterinary Stockpile and the other one I mentioned, the USDA operates them, so that's part of the USDA. And that would mean the USDA would have to beg and plead to Congress, please give us money for this. It's such a serious illness that they may get it. Also, the committee's recommended that the USDA work with states, have exercise, kind of like fire drills for responding to animal disease emergencies on farms. As Suzanne mentioned, we're talking about crowded conditions. So, filthy conditions. So, the conditions are just right for any type of really nasty illness to spread. The other thing that I'll mention that the committee recommended, that the USDA had a separate advisory committee to deal with foot and mouth disease. This advisory committee would be comprised of experts, veterinarians, and other scientists who could talk about the best way to use a vaccine. And the last area I'll mention that the committee has made recommendations in is in the animal disease traceability, also known as ADT, like the security company. All right, so this deals with identifying sick animals to treat them and also to prevent other healthy farm animals from being sick. All right, so knowing where the sick animals are, like who are they, where they have been, and when they have been is so crucial in order to managing a very highly contagious animal disease. So, let's see. So the USDA set these guidelines, and the committee worked with the USDA to establish identification standards and documentation standards to help the USDA identify and trace sick animals. And it applies basically to all farm animals, even captive deer. Yeah, I was shocked that they actually raise captive deer for food, but they do. And this rule became effective back in March of 2013, and it also applies to farm animals moving from one state to another state. So, as I mentioned, ADT is basically, the whole purpose is just to identify the sick farm animals, to treat them, and to prevent other farm animals from getting sick. There are several illnesses. There's porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. That's a new one. Came to the U.S., I believe, from China 2 years ago. That is there's another one that came like last year. The committee is going to be dealing with those issues at its meeting, which is in a couple of weeks. So in order to address these types of diseases, the committee's recommended that the USDA work with its Animal Plant Health Inspection Service to continue to monitor their animal disease traceability implementation. See what's working, what's not. You know, look at new technology to help facilitate the USDA in carrying out that rule. And also that the USDA conduct a study to evaluate its response to the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. And next step, and this is towards the end, as I mentioned, the committee is having a meeting April 28th, April 29th. It's in Bethesda. You can participate by submitting your comments, any questions, concerns you have about these issues. That is a link right there. You can attend in person or listen by phone. I got to tell you, if you attend in person, probably not going to get a chance to have input, but you will get a chance to submit comments or concerns before the meeting. And then the committee will look at those concerns and, you know, hopefully address them. Also, Animal Legal Defense Fund has a lot of wonderful, wonderful resources for students. And that's a link there. That is one way you could get involved with helping to protect farm animals. And thank you for your time.
Thanks everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Those were really two great presentations. And the disadvantage of going last is that the people in front of you tell everything that you were going to say. So what I'm going to try and do is talk a little bit at a higher level and try and address some points that came up to me when I was listening to everyone else speak. You know, I've been involved trying to change the way that the law regulates the treatment of animals produced for food. It sounds like everyone in this room is very aware at this point of how animals are raised for food. I imagine a lot of the day has been, you know, talking about that. The numbers that you discussed were, you know, obviously very accurate, and it was wonderful to see a focus on chickens because the overwhelming number of animals are clearly chickens. When we first started in the area, the reality that we faced was exactly what was identified by Suzanne, which was that there is so little law that you can utilize in any way to protect animals. While you can do it, maybe, and we can talk a little bit about it, from some sort of clever angles like the health aspects or the environmental aspects or human welfare or rights aspects. When you're looking for laws relating to animal welfare protection, it's very, very hard to find them. And as Suzanne said, when you start off, if you go to the federal level, you won't find any federal animal protection law that deals with how animals are raised on the farm. It's just absent. You can find some law for transportation, you can find a law on slaughter, although it has some very obvious problems, the most obvious one being that every animal that you talked about is not covered. Poultry is exempt from the Humane Slaughter Act. And that makes, you know, things very difficult, and that's where we started, no federal law. So then you go to the state law, and when you look at the state law, you basically have two types of state laws. You have the originals anti-cruelty statutes, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. Every state has one. You can't torture, maim, injure an animal unless you have a really good reason. And then your question was, well, will someone ever use that particular statute to try and stop a farming practice that is extremely common and accepted throughout the industry? These are statutes that are enforced by criminal prosecutors to go to a farm in a particular state where there's a large farming community, to go to a particular area of a state where they're heavily reliant on chicken production, then trying to find a district attorney who's going to utilize a general law to prosecute a farmer in that state from doing exactly the same thing that every other farmer is doing elsewhere in that state, all around America, which is supported by, in part, the federal government, and which is heavily, huge amounts of money are made by huge amounts of industries, trying to prove mens rea, trying to get the evidence, which you guys have probably been seeing speakers about undercover investigations. How do you even show what's going on? What type of penalties will you get? And then you get, classic defenses that individuals can make when they're prosecuted under anti-cruelty statutes, such as, this is a very vague statute and there's no way that I had noticed that I could possibly be violating it. Basic constitutional due process arguments. The fact is, it's very, very hard to use those types of statutes, and they've really very rarely been used. When they've been used for the most egregious, horrible cases. Someone beating a pig to death with a metal bar, burying animals alive, things like that. But when it comes to trying to reach battery cages, gestation crates, conditions of broiler chickens, forget it. And while those aren't great, there are also these common farming exemptions that were mentioned, which is that the industry decided to basically get in and just make sure about this, and they passed common farming exemptions throughout 35 states now, which says if you're doing something that everyone else is doing, it's exempted from the law, you can't even be prosecuted for it. So that was when we got into the animal protection area. That's what we had to deal with. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you fix it? It was particularly interesting on the federal level, which I found your talk so interesting, because it wasn't that actually the USDA hadn't tried to perhaps do a few things. It's that it's very difficult for them to do anything when there is no federal law in place that gives them the authority to do it. So for example, there was an effort 15, 20 years ago by the USDA to try and regulate the downed animal situation. And for those of you who don't know that, these are these very large animals, usually dairy cows, that go down, become unable to move. And then you have to, if you want to make money off the animal, you have to move them to a place of slaughter and slaughter them in a particular location. And if you don't do that, they become worthless. So there are these very unpleasant techniques that people utilize to drag those animals to get them to a place of slaughter. And the USDA actually started to promulgate a whole host of regulations dealing with the animal welfare component of downed animals, not focusing on the human health issue, but the animal welfare component. And it was stopped they were trying to do it under the Pakistan Stockyards Act, and it was stopped by a federal administrative court. And they said, nice try, but you have not one piece of authorizing federal regulation to be able to actually regulate in this area, so you can't do it. So the first things that the animal protection movement did to try and make things better was they tried to pass laws at the state legislative level, because the federal legislative level is just not going to happen. There was a Veal Protection Act in the early 1990s, a drafted Veal Protection Act at the federal level, went through these crazy congressional hearings. Nothing came of it. The Agricultural Committee at the federal level is totally controlled by industry. And so the sense was, let's move to the states. And then we tried at the state level, which had the same problems, because you have state agricultural committees that are controlled by agriculture, which led people to start to focus on ballot initiatives, which I think you're probably all very aware of ballot initiatives, whether it's through gay rights issues or whether it's through legalizing marijuana or whatever. Basically, you go out, you get enough signatures. If enough people say it's okay to put it on the ballot, there are different numbers in different states, it gets put on the ballot, and then at the election, if enough people vote in favor, it becomes law. It's a really powerful technique to get around political and industrial issues. And so ballot initiatives started up in Florida in like 2000, and they focused on exactly what you talked about, veal crates, gestation crates, initially only gestation crates. And the reason was that you get one shot, people walk into a booth and vote in favor of a law. You get one shot, you got no time to explain the law, so you just try and pick the most egregious method of raising an animal with the cutest animal you could possibly find. And you show a video that shows a cute animal in a horrible situation, and you hope that will work. Because the American public, when asked whether they support the way animals are raised for food, regularly states that they don't support it when they know about it. Raises a couple of issues. One is, how often do they know about it? Do they really know about it? And then the second issue is, well, they say they care, but do they care if it costs them more? Do they care if things change a lot? You have to deal with all those issues. So we started off with pigs and gestation crates, because Charlotte's Web and Babe and everything else, in a sense, was that would work, and it did work. And then we went to Arizona and we did veal crates because, baby boy cows, big eyes, cute, so on. And that worked. And then we went to California and we did Prop 2, which was battery cages with chickens. But with battery cages, because that's really easy to explain, it's small, it's cramped, and so on. And that worked. And then on the back of that, we were able to pass a few more state laws, all exactly as Suzanne said, focused on very restrictive methods of confinement, because those are very easy, easy things to draft and easy things to get support for. It would obviously be really great to move from that place to regulate farm animal welfare with additional state law and ideally federal law. And I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I would put out a few things for people who are interested in this to think about. At the federal level, the political power of the industry is still quite profound. Some of you may know that the HSUS actually struck a deal with the entire egg producing industry, the United Egg Producers, where they agreed essentially that if HSUS stopped bothering them with these ballot initiatives, they would go together to federal Congress and they would together agree upon language and pass a bill phasing out battery cages. And there are people who say it wasn't quite that, but we'll just go with that generally, in like 15 years. And they went to DC and it's dead. It's been dead for like 2 years. I don't think it's gonna come back for a while. And that was because the entire agricultural industry, other than eggs, got together and said never. Because the moment you have one farm animal welfare law in one area, then you're going to use it to build another. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try it, it just makes it difficult. At the state level, you have this interesting thing, which I think is fine initially, which is those states that have the most animals are obviously the states that are hardest to pass the laws, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. California, for example, has a very large animal agricultural base, and yet there have been very good laws passed. In addition, in California, they passed a law that said you can't sell into the state any eggs produced in violation of the California law on battery cages, which is a very, very powerful law. But the problem one has to face, and this may be somewhat unique to the United States, because it's very easy to focus on the European Union, which is great, and you should, because in the European Union there have been lots of laws that are a lot better, and you look at these regulations about cage size or materials that should be used, or a whole bunch of things, is that there are so many animals in America being raised for food, and the issue of how you regulate them is so complicated that it's very hard to imagine what type of law would you pass. Like if I asked you guys in this room to draft a law to protect all the farmed animals in a state or in the United States in a way that worked, you'd be like, well, that's going to be a very, very big law, okay? Because it's firstly going to have to deal with every animal and every stage of an animal's life in so many ways, all these things. And then secondly, it's going to be as of today, and we're going to have to worry about the new thing that the farmers do next week or the week after, and how we're going to deal with that. And so what people do in situations where you're dealing with such large numbers is they move to what you law students and everyone in the room understand is you move to a regulatory system, you move to an administrative law system where you have an enabling law written by Congress. It's general, it's broad, and then they give the responsibility to draft regulations that are very specific and detailed to an agency, and then the agency enforces those rules, and then if you don't like them, you have to challenge them. So the problem here, for those of you, for example, who are familiar with the Animal Welfare Act, is there's a very similar situation. The Animal Welfare Act says things like the USDA is meant to promulgate regulations to give exercise to dogs and to give psychological enrichment to chimpanzees. And the USDA promulgated those regulations. The animal protection groups can't stand them, hate them, think they're the worst thing ever. They've been challenging them forever, and they can't even challenge them successfully because of various issues around challenging regulations. So now if you imagine drafting a farm animal federal statute, you would have to give who? Presumably the USDA, who while they're interested in, and you're welcome to disagree with anything I'm saying, while they're interested in human issues and welfare, transmission of diseases, have actually never historically really wanted to regulate animal welfare, and the likelihood that they would embrace that role and support it is not necessarily high. But even if they did, you would then have to defer to them for the draft of all these regulations, which would bring in the whole issue of who drafts these regulations, which brings in the whole issue of veterinarians, which is a fascinating subject in and of itself. I mean, one example for you, when we ran the ballot initiative in California for Prop 2, banning the gestation crate, the fetal crate, and the battery cage, the California Veterinary Medical Association supported it, and then immediately split in two, because the large animal agricultural vets were so angry that the California Veterinary Medical Association had supported it that they walked away from the California Veterinary Medical Association, set up their own group, and there's now a small animal, essentially, Veterinary Association in California and the Large Animal Veterinary Association in California. I mean, the Veterinary Association, vets is a whole fascinating issue. I mean, it's like 85 to 90% of all vet students now are female, but the overwhelming number of them go into small animal vets. So the actual large animal vets who are doing the work, it's sort of unclear where they're coming from and how that's working. And the whole question of what a vet thinks about whether an animal suffers or not is way up in the air. Because, you know, there are some who say, look, you just measure their blood levels and cortisol levels, and if there's no high cortisol levels, clearly that's fine. There are others that will say, no, you look at their behaviors, you worry about other things. The American Veterinary Medical Association supported the gestation crate. Okay, so you can't rely necessarily on this working. And then if they pass regulations, the USDA, and you don't like them, you have to challenge them, and that is particularly fun, because then for those of you who are lawyers, you go to work about arbitrary and capricious, Chevron standards, blah, 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 and the chances are that for you to go and get standing and persuade a judge that the USDA didn't make the right decision over an intensive scientific determination of whether a broiler chicken should have 50 square inches or 20 square inches, whatever, very hard. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, it's just that's what you have to deal with. In the European Union, when you look at it, actually they don't have that. They don't have deference to, agriculture seems to have less control over government and over the rulemaking. The agencies seem to be somewhat more independent, and the decisions around scientific determinations of animal welfare seem to be sort of aggregated scientific, peer-reviewed science that then a more, this is my own bias, a more objective institution determines whether or not animals are suffering. Whereas in the US, it's a little more unclear. In the colleges of agriculture, the colleges of veterinary medicine, it's all complicated. So that's the problem on the animal welfare side. It leads you to, obviously, there's still many tactics you can take, and so there's the environmental tactics that people focus on, there's the nutrition issues, there's the antibiotic issues, which, you know, it seems very worthwhile, although I was going to ask either of you guys, there was an interesting op-ed in the New York Times where someone seemed to say, don't worry, because I think in Sweden or somewhere else, we don't use antibiotics, and we raise the animals in exactly the same way. There's been sort of a presumption that if you get rid of antibiotics, the ability to raise animals in these conditions will be so difficult that there'll be a natural change into a better way of doing things. And I think that's maybe true, but lately I've been seeing stuff that makes me a little less certain about it. We did a great lawsuit where which was under a statute called the False Claims Act, where there was this huge meat recall in Southern California, where it turned out that this particular slaughterhouse had been selling animals that had gone down into the school lunch program. And there were concerns about down animals having diseases. And so there was a statute called the False Claims Act, which allows anyone to bring an action on behalf of the government, as if you are the government, against anyone who has sold stuff to the government and lied to the government when doing so. So what these people have been doing is they've been selling meat to the government, saying that we are in compliance with all state laws and all federal laws, but they had actually been violating anti-cruelty provisions. They've been doing terrible things. And as a result of it, the HSUS was able to bring an action against the slaughterhouse, and then the government got involved and supported them, and the result of it was like a $350 million judgment against this particular slaughterhouse. So those options. What seems to be happening though, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, is that society seems to be addressing the problem with raising animals for food with less focus on trying to make better laws and regulations, in part maybe because they've given up the federal government. The likelihood of the federal government passing anything anymore seems so low. And moving more towards the things that you were talking about, which is we just want to know more, which leads us to undercover investigations and Ag-gag and all of that battle. And then we want you to tell us exactly what happened, and we'll make our own decisions, labeling and so on. Which, it's hard to know whether we think that's a good thing. David and I were at a debate the other week about that, and as you guys are probably aware, there are animal protection advocates who are utterly convinced that labeling is the way to go. It's absolutely the way to go. And you pointed out all the issues with the labeling, but as you correctly said, it doesn't mean we can't make them better. You know, and I actually do, and I'm not saying they're good or bad, but I do some work with an organization that does the labeling in Whole Foods. So for any of you guys who shop at Whole Foods, you go past the meat counter, it's this 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, 5 step plus. And I've done some work in that area, and I've had people who think that's a great thing. And then I've had a whole bunch of people who think it's the worst thing that could possibly be happening. And with very real criticisms. I mean, number one, who's drafting the standards? Number two, who's auditing the processes? Who goes in and actually checks, and how often they go in? Like, how can they go in every day? They can't go in every day. So what, do they go in every week? Do they go in every 6 months? Do they go back and check? So how much can you trust the label? And then, of course, for those of you who are into the sort of philosophical discussions of animal rights, if you want to bring Gary Francione into the room, which is always great to bring Gary Francione into the room, he will say, this is the worst thing you have ever done because you are now encouraging people to eat animals. You know? And it's a fascinating point. The Compassion Law Farming has run a fantastic campaign in the United Kingdom, getting rid of veal crates. And they now raise veal humanely, as in young male cows raised together, killed at a young age. And veal consumption in the UK has increased somewhat lately. Now, I actually don't agree with Gary on this point, but the point is, you know, there's that argument, which is labeling really so great? Can you trust it? And even if you can trust it, do you know that people are really perhaps buying more food? Or are you making things worse? Which leads you, of course, to the whole vegan argument, whether veganism is the way to go, and they should just be asking for veganism. And that one's very challenging too. There was a recent study done, which you guys may have seen, but asking people who go vegan how long they stay vegan. And it seems like on average 6 to 7 out of 10 vegans stop being vegan in about a year and a half. Mostly because it's very difficult to do, they say, and mostly because they are worried about their health, which could be because they're just not doing it very well. The ones that go vegan for ethical reasons tend to last longer. The ones that go vegan for health reasons tend to last the least amount of time. The ones that go vegan for ethical, environmental, climate change, and nutrition issues, and which is why you should go vegan for all those issues, they tend to last the longest, which is why now everyone's focusing on meat reduction rather than veganism. And I haven't talked about the corporate campaigns, but I must have run out of time by now. Right. So anyway, that was just my spiel to sort of, you know, to give you guys like an overview of the problem. There are so many ways to address it, but there are a lot of variables that you have to think about along the way. Great, thank you.
Thank you all. We have, I guess, about 8 minutes for Q&A. Yes?
Hi. Well, you know, the AWARE Act, which would add farm animals to protection of the AWA, would be very helpful. Of course, if we changed that statute so that it wasn't discretionary, it was mandatory, the agency actually had an obligation to do something instead of exercising its discretion not to do anything much, would be helpful. But I think what I'd like to ask about is the facility that was the subject of the New York Times article, which seemed to be, you know, I don't know if it's true or not, one of potentially 40 facilities where that kind of animal experimentation went on. It's particularly curious because it's one thing for the agency not to be able to do a whole lot if it doesn't have jurisdiction because the Animal Welfare Act doesn't protect farm animals. It's another thing if they're actually collaborating with industry and actively engaging in the kind of experimentation under, you know, as reported, horrific conditions. So they're really not just sort of an innocent bystander, but they actually have USDA federal, you know, dollars, tax dollars being used for experiments on animals for the benefit of big agriculture. So I'd like to know what can anyone say about the status of that investigation and the other facilities which may not have been reported about in the New York Times, but apparently also exist. You know,
Yeah.
USDA. You know.
I am familiar with that and the AWARE Act as well. So there was a report that was issued on the investigation, I believe early last month. And yes, there were areas that they found that needed improvement. They found a lot of the allegations in the New York Times to be unfounded. But here's the thing. The USDA sent people out to kind of check things, monitor it, and they gave the place, like, I don't know, enough time to clean everything up. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of one of those things, yeah, I mean, if you give, you know, you have guests coming over for dinner and your house is a hot mess, you know, and you have enough time to get everything, and people, ooh, wow, it's nice, but it's not normally that nice. So, yeah,
I mean, I don't know the answer to your question. And two things that always struck me about that one was how incredible the New York Times covered it on the front page. I mean, as crazily bad and everything as it was just astonishing to see that. I mean, I haven't seen anything like that. Of course, the other thing is like how insane that everyone gets so upset about it when they don't get upset about all the other stuff that's clearly going on that's horrifying at the same time. But still, I think it was, I mean, the New York Times has been particularly good lately. I mean, they've really shifted in the last 5 or 6 years, so it was nice to see that. I don't know if you know anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, for people who don't have the context of what we're talking about the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska, which was being run by USDA, but in conjunction with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, I think. It was sort of like a joint effort to engage in research on farm animals for the purpose of increasing production and efficiency for the agricultural industry. And so going back to the whole Animal Welfare Act thing, you know, you've got this federal statute that addresses the use of animals for research, but there's an exemption in there for not even just farm animal species, but it's farm animals being used for purposes of experimentation for, right, agricultural, like husbandry. So these animals unfortunately fell within that exemption, and it was discovered through a whistleblower who was a veterinarian at the center that all these egregious things were happening. But you know, one thing we got interested in, and it is part of that facility, is part of a much larger network of USDA agricultural research facilities being run around the country. One of the big ones is actually in Maryland. It's the biggest in the world. Yeah, in Beltsville, Maryland. I think it's just called the Beltsville facility usually. But you can find a list of all the facilities online, and what's amazing to me, I started digging into it, you can see a list of all of the experimentation that's currently going on and is lined up to happen next. All of the research that's been approved. And regionally, you see centers that focus on different types of animals, and of course they correlate with whatever industry is active in that area. So for example, in the Southeast, you see a lot of poultry research, and in the Midwest, you see a lot of pig research, you know. So you can actually see all of the genetic experiments they're running and all of the feed deprivation and space and light. I mean, it's crazy. And it's all divided into areas of research like disease versus, I don't know, whatever. There are a lot of different areas of research. But the other thing I want to just mention real quickly is that we also were very curious about, you know, jurisdiction, and we took a look at Nebraska's cruelty code and also the cruelty codes in the other main areas where these facilities are being run. And what I found again and again was that there's an exemption there for USDA-sponsored research happening in that state, and or research that otherwise like comports with the Animal Welfare Act. I don't know, there's a lot of language in most of these states that seems to speak directly to, it's like they were anticipating.
Yeah, and it comes out of the medical research stuff in the 80s when they saw the spring monkeys case, when there was a possibility of anti-cruelty law being applied to federal medical research, and so they got exemptions in place. I mean, so there's a long history. Anything the federal government is doing tends to be very difficult to reach from an anti-cruelty statute perspective. Jay?
One for you, Stacey. I first want to say that you have my sympathy for having what seems like the hardest job I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. They did not give me a warm welcome. The committee members, you're right.
Yeah. And so that's actually what I want to ask you about is your experience working with, you know, you're the sole advocate for the welfare perspective, it sounds like, working with a bunch of both ranchers and veterinarians and industry people. So what do you feel like the concerns are actually genuinely represented on the committee, or do you sometimes feel like you're just there to appease the animal rights people and that you're not genuinely, that your concerns aren't genuinely taken into account?
Yeah, I think that they do. The other committee members, I really do think that they listen. It was hard to get them to listen at first. You know, had to break through some barriers and kind of, you know, phrase things and put a spin on things that it would. I took the approach of what these are the concerns, and I tried to convey that we kind of had some similarities in the concerns, like, hey, if you have a healthy animal, you know what I mean? It's better for you as a rancher. So what can we do about this? And let's say that, you know, like for the use of with antimicrobials, I was able to take that approach and, you know, kind of get them to say, oh, okay, it can basically find out how it can benefit them, and also, of course, benefit the animal. So I was able to make some bridges in areas, yeah.
And can you quickly comment on how you identified what the concerns of the animal rights or animal advocacy movement are?
Sure. So what I would do is I'd send out emails, like the USDA would say, okay, look, we want the committee to look at these issues. And then I would just shoot them an email. Then meeting the animal welfare stakeholders like Animal Defense Fund. And then they would share some concerns with me. And some of the stakeholders that I represent, they have different views. One of them is Animal Health Institute. Well, that's comprised mainly of veterinarians, large animal veterinarians and that. But a lot of times it was the same. So, and that's one thing that you can do. The federal advisory committees, you are appointed on them. You know, you could nominate yourself. You could have someone nominate you, and to get on them, because they have a lot of federal advisory committees that work on animal welfare and animal rights issues, like the wild burro issue. I mean, I know people who've been wanting to get on that, and there are many other ones that you can serve on. There's one that Wildlife Services has, and they're the ones who, okay,
I know I want to.
oh yeah, you can totally be on it. And I know an agency, not an agency, but an organization I represent pro bono, Project Coyote. Camilla Fox is the executive director of Project Coyote. She served on that committee, and it's tough, okay. But I think if you take an approach of working with them and to come up with a solution, it can happen.
Thank you. We have just time for one last question.
Okay, just answering that, if we work with them, I don't feel like the goal, like you mentioned earlier, that the goal of the farm animal welfare campaign is to dismantle the factory farming system. But is that goal really approachable, and can we actually reach that goal if we're working with people that is not what they would ever want? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we can do is take steps, like baby steps.
But
with a lot of this legislation, federal agency rules, it's baby steps. It's going to be hard to, it's almost like going through any life change. You know, if you do it in steps, it's a little easier. Now, whether we're realistically going to get rid of, I don't know, big factory farms, I don't think so. Not anytime soon. You have too many people. You have people who consume meat. You have pet cats and dogs that need meat. There's just so many things out there that feed the drive for me. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think what we can do is work towards making laws, regulations that help farm animals more and get to that point. Just baby steps. It's hard, it's frustrating. I think baby steps can work.
Yeah,
Unless there's something really drastic and horrible that happens, then you can move from point A to point Z.
I mean, I think the question, you know, it's an excellent one. It's sort of the fundamental philosophical question that we ask ourselves. And I usually need to start drinking to really answer it, because I have no doubt that what you said is correct, in the sense that there are appropriate engagements with the enemy, the other side, whatever, that can result in productive, positive movement for the animal protection campaigns. But I have also no doubt that there are inappropriate engagements that don't. And so the question is how you make that decision and how you determine it. And why, you know, the one thing I didn't mention in my talk that I should have is why, you know, change, there's so many variables that can cause change. And so, you know, these great people who are working on like alternative food sources, whether it be, you know, mayonnaise that's made without eggs, or, you know, growing meat in a vat and all of these type of things, in a sense, they may ultimately have more of an impact in this area than anything that we do. But the question of whether, I mean, this is like Jay and I, and Jay's particularly focused on this, you know, how social change occurs, and whether you can cause social change by essentially working with the industry that is what you're trying to eradicate. You know, it's a great question, and so many people have different views about that one.
It's like the civil rights, you know, for women, for blacks, for Latinos. I mean, same thing with that. So
It's all-
people work within the system, people work
Right.
out and in between. So
And I appreciate baby steps, and I totally believe in that too, but this seems like such a entrenched with money and culture that I just can't.
It is hard. I can tell you, I've spoken with USDA executives outside of my work with the committee, and I was surprised that one of them said that he wants to change. He really wants to change things, but the ranchers have him by the cojones. And it's really hard for him to move. So you have people at the top level who really want the change. And if the one person I spoke with said it's like a big ship, like you're trying to turn it, it's slow, but it's turning. It's taking time.
I mean, there's been change like in the NIH, the last place I would have imagined it in terms of medical research in chimpanzees. And the whole question of split listing and chimpanzees and essentially stopping medical research of most chimpanzees and primates. That push came from NIH at the end. I mean, it was all from the animal protection movement, but there was a head guy at NIH who said, you know what, I'm going to support it. My favorite phrase that comes out of Stephen Weiss's book, I can't remember who was the quote, he was an economist, is that change, you rarely persuade people to change their mind. Change happens funeral by funeral. Meaning that, you know, people who disagree with you, they just get old and they die, and then a whole new bunch of people grow up and who agree with you and change. I mean, I think the gay marriage, gay rights issues is a perfect thing. I mean, kids at 25, 30 don't give a fuck about it, and all the people who disagree are just disappearing into the distance. So as much, you know, time is a very powerful process.
I think I have to end now, so thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.